All right, well, hey, what's up, YouTube land? Captain Bob here. We're going to talk today about new camera. Before I have used a little bit of everything. I've used the GoPro Hero 4 Silver. I've used my iPhone to shoot some things on the gimbal, which you guys have seen. I had a Canon Rebel T6i that I used to take some footage with, and I was just never happy or satisfied with the T6i's video. Takes phenomenal pictures, really like the photos, but didn't like the video. So started doing some investigation into what would be a good DSLR style camera to do video. And that's when, of course, everybody who's been out there has talked about the GH5. From what I could see, it seemed like a really great solution to a video camera that you could still take photos with if you wanted to. And I'm always looking for something that's, reasonably portable. If I take a vacation or something, I can take great photos on. And this seemed to be a good solution. So let me show you what I got and we'll talk about it here real quickly. Obviously, here's a shot of the GH5. You've probably seen it out there. I was able to pick this up on Amazon as an open box for about just under $1,800. The GH5 is a micro four thirds sensor. And if you don't know what that means, do some research. I had to learn myself. It just has to do with the sensor that's in the camera. There are several things about it that I love, and I'll go through the pros and cons for you here in a little bit, but I wanted to talk about the lens that I purchased, which I also found as an open box. I got the Lumix 12 to 35 millimeter f2.8 version 2 of this, and this lens is just phenomenal. In the micro four thirds world, that 12 to 35 is a 24 to 70 equivalent, and it's really great for shooting video on. I've been very pleased with that. So there's the basics of what I purchased originally. Of course, the camera comes with a strap, charger, battery, and then you've got to buy your lens that you want to go on there. Let's talk about the details of the likes and the dislikes. The pros and the cons. Why did I choose this camera? Like many, I felt like I really like 60 frames per second or faster of video. And if you slow anything down, you know why that is. If you want effective slow-mo, you need at least 60 frames per second, in my opinion, to make it look decent. But at the same time, I wanted to consider moving forward to 4K because I think we can all agree that we see that's where the future's going. Even though there may not be a lot of folks who have 4K, I still think it's valuable. So the pros for this camera that I could find was bang for the buck for the price. The GH5 had 4K, 60 frames per second. Even if it was, only 8-bit, 150 meg, if you start looking at the things that are coming down the pike, or if you do any reading about this, there's a firmware 2.0 that's going to continue to push the specs up, particularly in the world of anamorphic, which I'm not a guy who shoots anamorphic. I don't have any anamorphic lenses, obviously. But if you're into those things, this camera is really being pushed to its limits, I believe. The other thing that was nice was 1080p, 180 frames per second. So even if you're shooting HD stuff, 180 frames per second will get you some super sexy slow-mo. And maybe we can show you some of that. The lens, this 12 to 35 lens. The 12 to 35 lens that I purchased, this f2.8 Lumix G2, is just amazing. The quality of it is really, really good. For shooting video, those focal lengths are just really great. Now, if you're going to be doing some really far off stuff, you may want something with a little more power, but this is really a great starting point for the stuff that I'm doing. This camera, because it was open box and had been used, had already had Vlog L loaded on it, which, if you know, is a $100 option that I got on there for the same price, basically, or less, being that it was open box. You still have Cine D and things like that available if that's your picture profile that you prefer. I will tell you that when shooting Vlog L, from my experience, of course, you've got to get your IREs pushed in, if you're familiar with that terminology. To me, really, some will say 7.5 to 80. I really try to keep it between 10 and 75. And then allow a little bit of flexibility, but that's up to you on the IRE. I do find that when I'm editing that footage in Premiere Pro, which is what I use, that the LUT that Panasonic provides is not bad to get you kind of a starting point, but you are going to have to really push up, in my opinion, contrast, saturation, those kind of things to really get the color that I like for my preference. Cine D, totally different story, but with the Vlog L, I tend to underexpose about one stop, and I find that works best for me, but you know, your results may vary, so you may want to test that. Cine D, I tend to go with really spot on exposure, maybe under just a little for me, but that's, you know, your preference. The other thing that I really is amazing about this camera is the dual optical image stabilization. It's really good. In fact, I think it's probably the best image stabilization that I've seen in a DSLR. I think it's better than the Sony. I think it's better than the Canon, honestly. And so when you're out there, if you're doing any handheld shots, you're gonna love the image stabilization. Now, if you're running dual image stabilization, it's gonna eat into the battery life a little bit, but hey, I think it's a great trade-off. Battery life on the camera is phenomenal. For one thing, it uses the same batteries that they used to use on the GH4, if you're familiar with that, which I'm not, but I think it's interesting. So we're not talking about going out, if you're a Panasonic user, and having to buy a whole bunch of new batteries. You can use your existing GH4 batteries, or you can buy these. But the battery life on them is good. Depending upon how much you shoot, I usually get anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half with dual image stabilization, 4K, 60 frame per second type shooting. I'm a lot of start and stop. I run the LCD a lot, so that is something to keep in mind. But the stabilization is phenomenal. When it comes to being able to expose, there's all kinds of options that work really well. It does have zebra striping, if you're familiar with that. That works well, that you can adjust and set 2 different levels for what you want. It has a histogram, it has waveform. I use the waveform, and I think it's awesome. Once you kind of learn and figure out waveform, it works really well. The other thing that's really nice about this camera is if you are one who likes to go up to the viewfinder will show the video content through the viewfinder as well. Some cameras that I've used, when you are in video mode, it won't show any of the information through the viewfinder. And I think that's a really nice feature. I actually use that a fair amount. The LCD is really good. It, of course, if you check out this camera, you'll know that it tilts, rotates, moves around, all that stuff. Unlike the Sonys, which just drives me crazy, you can't do a selfie style format, you can't adjust. If you're really holding the camera in different angles, it's not as flexible. The brightness is phenomenal. You can see it out there in the bright sunshine. It's OLED type technology. Super good touch display. Menus seem to be, you know, relatively easy to work through for me. Another great thing about the Micro Four Thirds style is the size. While this for a Micro Four Thirds is what I consider to be a fairly big in the Micro Four Thirds format, I love the Micro Four Thirds size. It's a little bit more portable. Lenses are a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, but in the Micro Four Thirds world, I will say the GH5 is heavier. And then the other thing that I've really love are all the function buttons that they give you on this camera that you can then program to do what you want. We just don't see that a lot on other cameras. Sometimes they have limited function buttons. When you start programming those and you use them regularly, it is so nice to have those. So let's talk about what are the negatives. Everybody has been talking about the negatives of the autofocus. The autofocus is by far mediocre or worse. I find it works okay for situations that are really contrasty. But if you are one who absolutely needs autofocus, then you should be looking at Sony or Canon with their autofocus systems are just far better. They're promising some improvements with the 2.0 firmware, but let's just face it, until we see it, who knows? The other thing that I absolutely hate is the location of this display button right here. It's right where your thumb winds up going, and it always gets in the way. I absolutely hate that. I don't know why they put it there. It's in the way that it should be moved. Panasonic, if you're listening, move the display button. That was dumb. Again, weight for a Micro Four Thirds is definitely a negative. And then the final thing I'll say is that while I don't plan to and haven't done a lot of pictures with the GH5, I do think that the Canon T6i that I have does take a better picture. Granted, this is a 20 megapixel sensor. The T6i is even a 24 megapixel sensor, so you could say that that is a little different. But I just feel like the Canon picture just takes a better picture, in my opinion. I don't know, and I'm not a professional photographer, but from what I've seen, the Canon takes a better picture. But hey, for what I bought this camera for, it's for video. There are tons of other features that I haven't really used. There is the ability to do 6K photos, where at 30 frames per second, you can take 6K images, scroll through them, pick out an image, and say, yeah, I'll save it. So it's virtually shooting 30 frame video. Pick out whichever of those frames is best, save that as a photo, and you get an 18 megapixel picture out of a video shot. So if you're doing something in sports and you want to shoot photos and you want to take 6K 30 frame per second video tidbits of that and then pick out the exact shot you want, I think it would be phenomenal for that. But I've not used that exclusively, and I'm not a photographer. So the camera does have wireless capabilities, Bluetooth. They have an app you can remotely control. There are a lot of apps out there for setting up a viewfinder. Adam Wilt has one that's phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It lets you do monitoring of the camera wirelessly. Also coming in the 2.0 is link to be able to link to a computer. So if you want to set up a computer by a direct connection and use the computer to see things, control the camera, do things, they are going to have this link available. Again, firmware 2.0 features that I've not seen. So that's kind of the basics of why I chose this camera. I'm going to show you some video, give you a few examples of some stuff that was shot in Vlog. I'm not a colorist. I'm not a great grader of video. Just going to show you some basics, and you can see what you think. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Here's some video. This is Vlog L, 60 frame per second, 4K. Just using the built-in microphones, and got my IRE with these shadows set to about 7.5 and showing it topping out at about 65 to 70 on the highlights, and just underexposed a little bit. Base ISO 400. White balance set to cloudy because it is a little overcast today, but it's probably bright enough to go ahead and set the white balance. I'm not setting it manually at this point. There's more footage just walking with the image stabilization. 4K, 60 frames per second, Vlog, same exposure, same white balance.